Hello and welcome to Ava Gallery's ArtReach. Quickly before the program gets started, I'd like to thank our sponsors. Those include Goss Logan as well as Gail and John Wasson. Today, I am very excited to be joined by Jessica Fields.
Hello.
She is a landscape painter. We're currently down in South Carolina in her studio in Greenville, but she exhibits with Nahcotta Gallery up in New Hampshire, so you can find her work there. But her work has beautiful surfaces, and she explores mountainscapes, landscape as well as still life. But I will turn it over to Jessica so she can talk a little bit about her current practice. And we'll get started with the demo.
Hey, great. Hey, everybody. Yeah, I mean, there's like a million ways that I like to start a painting. What I thought I would do today with a little mini, which is really my love, I love painting small, is to start with a landscape and a color scheme. So this is typically how I work with these little guys. Tiny little thumbnails that I print from vacation pics or, just down the road. This is Table Rock, the hill country of Texas. And I'm gonna do this tiny guy right here, which was actually up in West Virginia. I like to keep my references super small because while I cannot invent things, I'm not good at drawing from my imagination. I need to be able to start with something. And then I do like to be able to play around a bit. And so the smaller it is, and the harder it is to see, the more that I can just kind of make up what I want. Color-wise, I thought I would paint this color palette here. I don't know, I'm very drawn to like grandma-y type images right now. And this color palette's really pleasing to me. It's got some great greens in it too. And there's a lot of greens happening in this West Virginia scape. So that's the Googlo piece I'm going to be working from. Just getting some inspiration from the colors, that's all. I'm really drawn to color opposites. So in this one, it's the kind of pinkish, greenish that's happening here. Blue and orange are a favorite. Purple and yellow, if I can manage it without making it look like an LSU flag. But anyway, here's some other color options that I go to for inspiration. Werner's Nomenclature of Colors is a fun one because this is the book that Charles Darwin used to describe colors in his Nature on the HMS Beagle. So that's fun. I often have trouble with neutrals. I'm not a very subtle person. So I like to refer to these sometimes and see what's interesting in there. But then also, this is a really fun book, Color Schemes, An Irreverent History of Art and Pop Culture and Color Palettes. So if we want to look at maybe some fun purples, these are all of Prince's concert outfits. I think I'm probably going to be using some Purple Rain Tour in Nassau Coliseum from 1985. All right, so we're going to be, like I said, painting from this tiny little landscape here. So I don't do a lot of drawing with my landscapes. I do a little bit more when I am working with still life, a little bit more precise, but not much, honestly. Here I am, just blocking in where some colors are going to go. I like to work on a firm surface. I work mostly with palette knives and cold wax medium, and we'll get into more of this fun stuff in a second. But because of the knives, I like a firm surface. I don't like bouncing around on a canvas. And so these panels actually work really well for me. And when I work larger, I'm using larger panels and actually stretching the canvas over it because I do like the texture that the canvas gives me. If it's too flat, I feel like I'm speeding across and I lose control. And here's where I start inventing a little bit. We're going to make these kind of a little tree line here. There we go. So that's the extent of the drawing I'm going to do. I try to just think of things in terms of real planar areas, color blocking. But for a small 5x7 painting like this, I don't want to focus on more than really 3 colors and their values. So just kind of, then I look at the image or landscape and try to fill, like almost fill in the blanks. Like, okay, if I'm working with green, yellow, and peach, what's this going to fall into? And right now, this sky, I want to be kind of just almost white. Even with like larger, 3 foot by 5 foot paintings, I'm using this tiny knife a lot. I should probably get away from that. Sometimes this guy, but then occasionally like a trowel or even this big guy here. Ooh, I'm not really sure what this is for. It's I think to block your paint, your molding while you're painting your walls or something. I don't know. I scrape paint with it. So let's try to use something kind of big. That'll be fun. I'm just applying that onto the trowel. There we go. And so what I like about this is it's going to naturally leave some areas exposed and let that green pop through. I love working on a colored surface. White kind of is intimidating, I think, for most artists. So I start with a bright color. Since I knew I was going to be working with that peach a bit, I think the green's going to pop out nicely. But I always want a little bit of accident happening. The less in control I can be, the better, because happy accidents are where it's at. All right, gonna go a little bit more purple. I like to smear the colors together. Sometimes I like to give them a little bit of room between each other. And again, let that underpainting shine through. One of my favorite things about painting with palette knives is that you're just cleaning the surface of your knife with a BB wipe. And that's what I'm doing most of the time, instead of having to wash brushes, which it was never good at. So as you can see, I'm mixing in this cold wax medium. There's some firmer cold wax here that's dried up a bit, and then I've got some looser stuff off to the side here. The cold wax thickens the paint, creates a matte finish instead of a gloss, and it helps the paint dry a little bit faster, like butter. I love it. I'm a little stingy with my paint. I'm always trying to use it somewhere, blend it into another color if I mix too much. I like to say maybe it helps with my color relationships, but really I just am cheap. I make my own cold wax. The stuff you can buy at the store typically is a little thinner than what I like. I like a nice 50-50 blend of just artist grade beeswax and turpentine. It sets up like butter, and like I said, just sits on my palette, and I blend it into the pigments as I'm blending the colors themselves. A lot of people think that because I have these spaces between my colors that I'm scratching back out. I don't do that a whole lot. Sometimes I lose like a horizon line or something though, so I'll come back in and just kind of clarify what I want. But it's more that I try to avoid certain areas or just let certain areas like be a little bit freer, a little opener. All right, let's see what's going on. Maybe a little bit darker, a little blue back there. maybe it's a mountain, maybe it's a cloud in the background. See, this was a color from a painting last week, but I think it's gonna work. I'm gonna go into that kind of corally pink color though, that we saw in the Uglo painting, and I'm gonna use that for this like back mountain.
Question. Can you talk about how you prep your panel and what gives it that green color?
Stingy with my paint. If I make a lot of an extra color, I will use that to just cover the surfaces of a few panels when I'm done for the day.
Okay.
So that's a big jump right there from that purple. Oh, let me find you. Yeah, that purple to that peach. I want them to be a little bit closer together. So I'm actually just gonna steal some of the color I was working with before and blend it in to that coral. Yeah, that's gonna push back into the background a little nicer, not pop quite so much. We're not ready for a big pop yet.
I did have a question about the palette knife. Was there a certain critical moment for you, or had you always been kind of experimenting more with the palette knife, or at what point did you kind of abandon brushes for this form of mark making?
I mean, I am not gonna lie, it really was a lot about the brush cleaning and being tired of that. But it was back in art school days. It went hand in hand when I started doing cold wax. I was a big fan of the Abex painters, abstract expressionists, and just like the gobs of paint they used. It was beautiful. So I went to my professor and I'm like, how are they doing this? How are they getting so much paint, you know? And he was like, you can't afford that. You don't have the budget for that much paint right now. So he handed me a big manual of all the artist mediums that I could try. And I got into cold wax as the solution to my problem, which then I kept making thicker and thicker and thicker until it didn't make sense with brushes anymore. And started completely using palette knives for everything.
You found it impacted over what subject matter you used? Did it initially impact what like imagery you were drawn to?
I think so. I think because I was a real strict landscape painter for years and years and years. And obviously the edge of the palette knife creates such a beautiful line. And early on I was really inspired by the landscape I grew up in, which was Houston and Louisiana, which is like the flattest land ever. So I was essentially just painting stripes, stripes upon stripes upon stripes, sometimes some telephone wire in the top of the canvas going across the sky, so even more stripes. And I did that for a long time until I moved here, in fact, and saw the mountains and got inspired by those and started having more angles and whatnot. And was still primarily a landscape painter until the pandemic. And then I was inside all the time and I started painting my stuff. So
Yeah, some of these jets are just beautiful. This here with the rug. To think this is all done with palette knife
Thanks.
is pretty fantastic.
Yeah, that was my studio mate Chris's space. It was like this sliver of doorway would be open as I walked up the stairs to my studio, and I could see that rug and that plant, and just became obsessed with it. And that was one of my first chair pieces from last year. Yeah, I mean, like painting those tight patterns really gets my mind at ease, like really kind of meditative. That's why I love to do those.
Looks lime green here.
Yeah, I thought I was gonna go with a much warmer green, but with the warm green on the base, I think the lime's gonna stand out a little bit better. I think of color pretty relationally, so I've got that green already on the background, so everything's got to relate to that. And then like one color's just started to bore me, so I just started, blending in more and more colors so that you could have some fun, different stuff going on there. But you constantly want to make sure that they're all friends, or at least have interesting relationships. I guess they could be enemies, but there's something going on between the colors. Right now, I think I want to go a bit darker.
I think it can be challenging for some observational artists to change locations and to change scenery. Can you talk a little bit more about how that transition in place affected your practice?
I think it's kind of osmosis, like just being here and hiking those trails and observing, it has changed how I think about my surroundings, just even driving around here. Again, I can't reiterate enough how flat Houston, Texas is. Like it took me a while to like not get scared driving up hills here because I was like, what's gonna happen on the other side? I don't know. So just that kind of different perspective has totally altered how I exist within the space, and that of course informs my painting. I don't think it's as conscious as I would like it to be. We're kind of making that darker black like I was talking about earlier. Sap green, phthalo blue, and then a little bit of phthalo green too. And I added some alizarin crimson to neutralize it a bit. I don't want a full black color though, so I'm going to add a little bit of zinc white and hopefully, like I said, pull that green out a little bit. Is composition first, like no matter what's going on in front of me with the view or the picture of the constantly editing for composition. And my sense of composition really goes back to like the rule of thirds, you know, just trying to make sure that you're keeping the eye moving and hitting those grid points a little bit. Like right now, that pink is a little centered for me, so I might do something a little more interesting over here. Like maybe hint at a singular tree, even though I just said I don't paint, you know, one-offs. But maybe this guy's by himself out here a little bit. And that's gonna pull that eye this way.
In terms of scaling things like this up,
Mm-hmm.
how do you kind of approach it differently than some of these smaller works?
Yeah, absolutely. I have the exact same problem, especially because my heart is so much with the tinies. Um, I try to really vary my tool usage and make sure that I've got things that are adequate for the size of the piece that I'm working on. So even though I'm most comfortable with this little 1-inch guy, having the larger trowels to keep me from getting too precious and to create some more interesting mark making are really what I rely on the most with the larger pieces. So in larger works, you can see, whereas I just had like the green on the canvas panel for the tiny piece, I'm doing lots of underlayers, lots of different colors going on that I can react to for the larger pieces. So all of this is just exposed underlayer up here too. All of this has not been painted on top of, that's just all peeking through, creating a lot more interest in the bigger pieces.
Jessica,
Mhm.
are all the colors in your palette opaque paints, or do you mix in some transparents and semi-transparents?
I do have lots of transparency actually. The cold wax does create an opacity though, which I enjoy. I like that in my painting. The sense of layering you get is mostly through the scraping nature of the palette knives, not the transparency of the paint itself. Um, but I still like it for the transparent colors just in order to be able to mix in different ways, like using that zinc white. In order to let those colors come forward more and not make it be so much about like a pastel.
For as saturated as the colors are,
Mhm.
they're extremely opaque.
Yes.
You know, which is I think a tricky thing to pull off because as soon as you add a lot of white to something,
Mhm.
it can very easily shift into
Yes.
the pastel territory. So is in terms of the transparent pigments, like I see alizarin crimson and some is that permanent rose that tend to be transparent.
Mhm.
It almost looks like you're almost like tinting the white in a
Yeah.
very, very saturated way.
Yeah. And then especially like maybe this is a very pastel piece for me, honestly, but what I might want to do here is come back on top of this and drag, you know, like some really um intense yellow over it and let that pop off. Look at some lemon. So it's really just about letting the colors lay right on top of each other and play with each other that way than with the more traditional blending. Now those can kind of smush together and live with each other. And even here with that green coming forward in the that blackish area I have at the bottom, I'm not too happy with, so I might come back with a more vibrant blue in the shadows. I think that's maybe what I need. I think that richness just really helps the foreground hold together a little bit better, let that weight sit on there a little better.
I have a question for you that I think is relevant to a lot of us.
Yeah.
And that is social media.
Yeah.
And not to switch gears dramatically, but I know that
No,
there's
absolutely.
some artists in the audience here. And I think you're an artist that has a very large, sizable audience on Instagram,
Mhm.
almost over 100,000,
Mhm.
or well over 100,000,
Mhm.
which I think, for some artists, myself included, it's such an important vehicle for sales,
Yeah.
getting gallery representation, attracting new audiences. But it also can be tough, it's like you have to document your work in a certain way.
Mhm.
You have to, it's easy to, sometimes have it impact your practice.
Mhm.
Do you think being so involved with social media, do you think it has an effect on your practice, or how do you approach that, or
It
what are your
definitely
general
does.
thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think it for sure does. Um, in good ways and bad ways. It makes me look at my work more because I think I got lucky with my social media following, for one thing. The algorithm's constantly changing, and whatever I was posting and got some hits for at one point carried me to some numbers that I wasn't expecting for sure. The only thing I ever recommend to people is consistency, is if they want their social media following to grow. I did what was called 100-day project, where you post a new piece of art every day, and that was like a hashtag. So I found like a community of artists that were all doing that at the same time. I think it was run by an artist named Ella Luna, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, that posting every day not only helped my practice, but helped me connect with a community, and I think satisfied the computer algorithm. But what I've enjoyed about it, besides the community, is constantly looking back at my work, documenting it, seeing where I've been, what I'm doing, where things are going, has been extremely helpful. So I don't think that's something I ever would have done consistently if it weren't for Instagram.
And I think there is so much like talk about, the negative impacts of social
Mhm.
media, but I think that it is such an empowering tool for artists as well.
Yeah.
To be able to find new audiences organically. And that's a good point of like it also, if you're seeing all your work
Yeah.
on a device instantaneously, it's easy to see kind of common threads and to pull from it and see how your palettes relate.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I'll have followers like comment on my palette changes before I even realize they're happening. Like they're seeing it in real time, and that's always fascinating. I'm like, oh, am I using more blue? Okay, I didn't even. Whoa, I see that now. Alright, I think I'm kind of coming to the end of this painting. Just kind of happily adding a little bit of contrast and detail work just to keep it interesting.
I'm always blown away when an artist can produce something presentable in a 45-hour period.
It was that 100-day project, man. It got me going fast. I like to keep up with the practice. I don't do prints of my work. I just sell originals, but I like having this size as kind of like an accessible price point. So, yeah, these are always fun to do.
You have in mind for future paintings? I see blank canvases here
Yeah.
that are recently stretched. I would love to hear more about that.
Sure. So my most recent body of work that I'm most excited about is a chair series I started last year. My mom died in July of last year. And so, as I was saying before, the detail work, like the heavy pattern stuff, is really a good way for me to like kind of lose myself and get out of my own head. And so, after her passing, I was doing like these super intricate, like caning chairs, and just really processing things that way. Also, like, come on, the idea of an empty chair, like it was right there on the nose a little bit. But I went from that to painting kind of chair portraits of everyone in our studio. There's like 12 artists that work in the same building as me, so I painted all of their chairs, which was also very grounding, kind of just focusing on like people I love and the stuff that makes them unique and how they process things. And it really pushed me in a lot of different directions. Because, you know, I was really trying to see things from their perspective. And now I'm working on more chairs that are inspired by that body of work. So there's some like old school, like just like literally old school chairs, like the primary colored plastic molded chairs of my youth that have been really fun to paint. So I think I'm gonna get back into chairs pretty soon.
Yeah, I love this this piece here, this Eames chair, and you can see that turquoise. I imagine is the canvas, right?
Yeah.
Yep. So
right.
that turquoise is just the canvas showing through, kind of how you saw it in Jessica's demo.
Okay, I think I'm done with that painting, guys. There we go. I like to do a little snapshot like that. Cha-ching.